Welcome to the News and Why It Matters. I am Sarah Gonzalez. We are joined by Mr. Kevin Williamson today from National Review. Thank you so much for being here. And before we get started, I hear you have a new book coming out.
Yeah, it's called The Smallest Minority. It'll come out in the end of July. And it's about how social media is killing democratic discourse and making everyone stupid and angry.
I love it.
In a world in which there's a surplus of stupidity and anger already.
I love it. It could not come at a better time.
Yeah.
All right, Stu, what's your top story?
I think I have a great story to illustrate exactly what your book is about today. It's about whether Honey Nut Cheerios will give you cancer or not.
Okay. All right. Pat.
Reparations, raising that ugly head again.
Okay. And Kevin.
Joe Biden saying nice things about segregationists and getting himself in hot water.
Okay. Oh, man, I can't wait for that one. Obviously, a lot to get into. First, we want to thank our sponsor, Relief Factor. So, those of us at the table, I think all of us are unfortunately to that age where just things start hurting. And you wake up and you're like, I just screwed up my back. Well, how did you do that? Sleeping? Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
Usually sleeping.
Sleeping? I don't know. So try Relief Factor if you are one of many Americans who you just live in constant pain and you just think that you're never going to get out of pain. Maybe you've tried prescription drugs. Maybe you've tried acupuncture, massage, and nothing's working. Relief Factor is 100% drug-free, much to Stu's dismay. But it does work. So it's 4 key ingredients that fight the inflammation in your body, which usually is the root cause of your pain. So 70% of the people who try this 3-week quick start pack, they go on to keep ordering more. It's working for the majority of people. It can work for you. It's worth a shot to get out of pain. It can change your life. You can go to relieffactor.com, get that 3-week quick start pack for $19.95. That's $20. $20 and the odds are in your favor. I would say that's worth it. ReliefFactor.com, or you can call 800-500-8384. All right, Stu, talk to us about Honey Nut Cheerios.
First of all, they're delicious. That little bee did a good job.
They are, yeah.
Honey Nut Cheerios. So there is a story that came out recently that Honey Nut Cheerios might be giving you cancer. It wasn't just Honey Nut Cheerios, all sorts of different cereals, because they have this very dangerous ingredient, glyphosate, in it, which comes most likely, everyone talks about it from Roundup. Mm-hmm. So there's been some giant awards for people recently. A $2 billion award, one in California, trying to tie the idea that glyphosate is causing cancer around the country. And it's one of these things where I think it ties very much into, it's a very social media friendly claim. Like, you are feeding your kids these cereals and, oh my gosh, these terrible things are going to happen.
Why are you a bad parent?
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I think in a way, and it's hard to imagine, but the reporting on things like health and food and things like that is actually worse than the political reporting in America. It's actually worse because, in a way, at least with political reporting, you have another party that sits here and says, well, wait a minute, they're wrong, and at least there's a fight. And the media won't cover that fight fairly, in my opinion, but there's not even really another side that pushes back, because it's just basically the companies that make the cereal, and they're like, I swear we're not giving kids cancer with our Honey Nut Cheerios. I swear, but who believes them, right?
Is it actually an ingredient, or is it just something that's there because they used Roundup on
Exactly,
the
so it's like residue. It's not an ingredient. That's a good point, yeah.
I hadn't actually heard that yet.
Yeah, no, they're actually adding
Listed on the side of the box.
Little fertilizer.
Yes, as one of the only people that I know that has actually had ingested intentionally drinking glyphosate to prove a point on a show a while ago. It is not a good tasting beverage. I will say they did not make it to taste good. It's not harmful, but it will not taste. It will not make your drinks better.
Was that worth it to you?
Yeah, oh yes, I love it. I love it.
But what about when you're like 80 and you have 500 different types of cancers?
I won't, and that's the whole point of this segment. So let me just give you the idea of how they came to these measurements and how ridiculous the story is. Everything is toxic at some level. Mm-hmm. We all know water is toxic at some level if you drink too much of it. So how much is actually okay to ingest? Well, this is how they decided to figure this out. First of all, they start with a species. They're not going to give it to normal people to test, right? They give it to a species that is actually much more likely to develop cancer over this, mice, okay? They give it to mice. So they figure out what is the absolute minimum level of potential harm in mice. And that comes out to roughly 140,000 milligrams a day, okay? Now,
more than a mouse weighs.
Right, yes, 40,000 milligrams a day. Okay, so now that's for an adult mouse, I guess. So they lower it by about 80% to get a reference dose for children, okay? So 30,000 milligrams a day would be, there's a potential for starting harm at that level. Then they divide it by 10, okay? So just, if 30,000 is the minimum, we're going to divide that by 10.
And why do they divide it by 10?
Well, because
where does that come from?
That comes to the next step, which where they divide it by 100, again, for safety, to get you to 30 milligrams a day, and that is what the EPA says is okay and completely safe for a human, 30 milligrams a day for children to ingest. Now, California we have, right? And we all know what California does with EPA standards, right? They make them much more stringent. So they decided to take the 30 milligrams a day and reduce it by 97%. Okay, so they're allowing 1.1 milligrams a day of glyphosate. Okay, so what does this all mean? Now, this is what you would have to do to get glyphosate at 1.1 milligrams a day, according to this study with Honey Nut Cheerios. Now, before we even get to this number, we should note that this is an environmental group that came up with this study. It is not a peer-reviewed study. They did not release their methods, and they did not release any of their data. Okay. So they just gave you this sort of like, this is how much we say is in Honey Nut Cheerios, okay? To get to that level that California says is safe for children, you would have to eat 80 bowls of Honey Nut Cheerios every single day.
Don't act like you've not done that, Stu.
I'm hungry.
Don't act like you've not done that.
Now, how long? Every day for 80 years, okay? For 80 years, and that would give you a 1 in 10,000 chance of harm, a 0.0001% chance of harm.
Still on there, though.
It is on there, so I can't deny there is a risk here.
But you would have plenty of fiber.
Exactly, you would be. Now, there is another asterisk I will give here. That is the child level, so you'd have to remain a child for all 80 years. And I don't know exactly how to do that. Maybe that much Honey Nut Cheerios will do it. I don't know. But I mean, again, like this is the type of thing that gets shared on social media. It's Pinterest science, right? And it's like, these things are, all the stuff that we talk about, the politics are really important. But like, there are parents out there that are avoiding giving their kids Honey Nut Cheerios because they went on Pinterest or Twitter and they see this claim and they're terrified that they're going to feed their kids cancer. They're scaring the living hell out of parents all over the country over absolutely nothing. And the fact that this stuff, I mean, do we have the headlines? I don't even think I'd call for the headlines. Look at the headlines for these stories. I mean, breakfast cereals contaminated by weed killer, cereal positive for trace amounts of weed killer, Nature Valley cereals contain Roundup ingredient. Like, I mean, they go on and on. Your cereal are contaminated. Like, there is no reason to believe this analysis, and it's so terrible. It makes you like pine for like the fair coverage that Republican conservatives, receive on tax policy. It's really terrible.
But again, the level was 30,000 milligrams, right? For to be harmful, to actually cause cancer in the mice
per day, and that still is a small chance.
30,000 milligrams, and then for whatever reason, just to make it safe for humans,
they want to undercut it,
they
right?
just divide it by a bunch, and they get to 1.1. So I mean,
even that would be completely ridiculous, impossible to actually affect you.
Amazing.
That's just the beginning of any harm.
If you came and chewed on the dead weeds outside my house, you might get more than that.
Maybe.
There's some fairly fresh Roundup on those, I think. But it's funny, we live in a world in which we've got this large camp of people who are always talking about how much they love science. But so much of what we're actually dealing with, even in public policy, is this preposterous pseudoscientific stuff. For instance, when the Affordable Care Act was first being debated, I wrote about how certain provisions of it would open up the way for coverage for things that are completely pseudoscience, like aromatherapy. And a lot of people don't know this, but there's no scientific evidence that chiropractic does anything, or at least anything that like having your wife give you a back rub wouldn't also do.
Which is nice, by the way.
Right. But we actually recognize these things through public policy. And but on the other side, you've got the things where people are just terrified of things that aren't really things to be terrified of, like genetically modified organism crops and things like that. So while we're all talking about how much we love science, there's actually quite a bit of it out there that gets ignored for purely cultural and political reasons. There was a woman writing in the Washington Post the other day about how people on the right don't value science enough, and I thought, yeah, turn the page in your newspaper and read the horoscopes.
Yeah.
It's a superstitious world out there.
It is, and I think it's completely okay if you want to avoid these things. People have different preferences, but it's the media's job in theory, right, to try to distill this and give people a perspective of what it actually means, But as we all know, you want to get clicks, you want to get tweets, you want to get all these shares, you have to make these loud, sort of terrifying comments, and it's why. if something, like whatever you think about global warming, let's say it's completely like the worst case scenarios are all true. There's no way to communicate that to half the country because they see you telling these stories over and over again that they have no trust built up. And you go down these roads of doing, especially reporting on science, that is so terrible, so often that it just basically wipes out, I think, any credibility you'd have to convince people of something that's actually important.
Yeah. Pat, I want to move on to reparations. Thank God we are finally talking again about reparations.
Finally, right? Because it's been a few years since this has come up, and we completely discounted it because it's ridiculous. Because we're not the ones who perpetrated the crime, and nobody that the crime happened to is alive today. And usually we arrive at that conclusion, and then we move on again. And then it'll come up again a few years later, and then we'll say, well, wait. Everybody who was involved died 160 years ago, and so did the people who did it. So we move on. But this time, I don't know, we're kind of down the road a ways of extremism and radicalism, and they're actually doing a hearing now and trying to pass a bill about that would start the process of reparations. They still don't know who's going to pay, how much is involved, who do the payments go to? What kind of parameters do you set for who receives the money? Do all black people, do, for instance, Caribbean blacks receive it who weren't involved in slavery? Or is it just people who have ancestry from Africa? Sheila Jackson Lee, who is a representative from Houston,
She's fantastic.
She's fantastic. Yeah. She's awesome. And she showed a lot of that yesterday. Here she is talking about reparations.
We even welcome the diversity of thought among the multicolored chocolate people that are African Americans, descendants of African slaves.
Right.
Let me be very clear.
Okay.
It is only this group, even though they attempted to enslave Native Americans, it is only this group
It's only this one.
that can singularly claim to have been slaves
Singularly?
under the auspices, the institution, and leadership of the United States government.
Okay, I have no idea what she
But here's something I rarely say in life, is that Sheila Jackson Lee has a point.
Oh, yeah?
Which is what was she saying?
Not
that
the chocolate people.
The
and the chocolatey people, yeah, that's
That was odd.
it's kind of an old rhetoric. DC used to talk that way, call itself Chocolate City, that sort of thing. But she did say there that these things should be limited to people who are actually the descendants of slaves.
Yeah.
So if you're going to make an argument for that, that should be part of it, because there are a lot of black people in the United States, there are a lot of people of African origin in the United States who are not the descendants of slaves.
Right.
In fact, I believe last time I read, Nigerian Americans are the single wealthiest group in the United States, the single wealthiest demographic group. They're not very large, of course, and 80% doctors or something like that. But if you're just talking about people of African origin, Elon Musk is of African origin. I don't think he's going to qualify for reparations.
Right. Right, but the multicolored chocolate people, They will.
I feel like every time we go down this reparations road, like there's obviously a point there where, like, there was a time where that may have been very appropriate, after slavery first ended.
Yes.
But when you come down to actually trying to design this policy, like if you're actually legitimately putting this into effect, it's so clearly impossible, right? Like to do. I mean, what was it? About a third of white people in the South had slaves, right? So, like, I mean, you're talking, do the descendants of other white people who didn't have slaves pay this back? I mean, do people who, you go through this whole, like, litany of ways you try to break this down. And of course, like, I don't think there's a constitutional way of taxing white people to pay black people. Like, that can't, I mean, because it certainly would have been done to tax black people to pay white people in other eras when they thought that was just. So, like, that's a terrible precedent to be set anyway. You should not be taxing a color. And so it feels like the end game here, how does this all shake out? Let's just say they were able to actually go through with a policy of reparations. It would just wind up being taking money from people they thought benefited wealthy people, including wealthy blacks who now have lots of money, and they would wind up giving it to poorer people who are underprivileged privileged who have been punished, like including poorer whites. And so it would just be yet another redistribution plan with just a different justification sort of slapped on top of it.
Yeah, this is almost impossible to work. It's impossible to work. And sometimes the defense is, well, others have received reparations. For instance, Japanese Americans. But you gave that went, and it was $20,000 per family. But that went to people who were actually interred and were still alive. It went to those families. Now you have no one like that now. It's just been too long. But like you said, Stu, had they done reparations right after slavery, you could kind of understand.
Oh yeah, for sure.
One of the other problems with this is I think it keeps us from talking about better policies. I mean, there are a lot of things that are wrong in African American communities that are, at least in part, the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and all the rest of it. You know, 1964 was not that long ago. 1968 was not that long ago, and they're still living with the consequences of the policies that were pursued during that time. There are a lot of things that could and probably should be done to try to mitigate some of those effects. But reparations is such a ridiculous sort of pie in the sky, unworkable, and probably unjust way of going about that we're going to spend a lot of energy talking about this instead of the other. It's a little like the Green New Deal shenanigans, where there are a lot of things we actually could do to make energy production less carbon intensive. But reworking the entire global economy under the guidance of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not one of them.
No.
All right, back in a minute. I also don't think it's doing them any favors, just, letting them know that they're a victim today. Before we get back into the conversation, I want to thank our sponsor, realestateagentsitrust.com. So it turns out that your father's sister's cousin's dog walker's grandmother is not probably the best person to get your house from. Is that going to shock anyone? Are you shocked?
She did a great job for me.
Okay.
Did she?
I was kind of lucky. Yeah.
But where you do want to go is realestateagentsitrust.com. So Glenn formed this team. These guys are in radio. They move around all the time. So they were noticing what all of the top real estate agents had in common and what all the crappy ones also had in common. And so they have this team that they actually go out and vet the top real estate agents all across the country to make sure that they're doing this full time. They are the top real estate agents in that particular area. They know what they're doing. They are going to get you the best value. And they know where the areas are that your family is going to be happy, where your family is going to be safe, because they share your values. So if you are looking to buy or sell, no pressure. It's just the biggest investment you're ever going to make in your life. So you probably want to go to realestateagentsitrust.com. They have one in your area. They're all over the country. realestateagentsitrust.com. Kevin, let's talk about Joe Biden.
If we have to.
We do. We do have to. We always on the show talk about, well, there's still time. He's very gaffe prone. There's still plenty of time for him to ruin his run.
Which I think he will. I don't think Joe Biden's going to be the nominee, just for the record. I don't. I think he is old. I think, and I don't say this to be cruel, I think he's just not really entirely there anymore. I've sort of seen him off camera, and he's like this sort of slightly confused old man. He still does pretty good when you put him in front of a lectern or something. But I do not think that Joe Biden will be their nominee. And a lot of Democrats don't want him for various reasons. One of those is the politics of cooties, which is that Biden, because he's been in the Senate since I was born. Was he elected in 72?
I think
or maybe it was in the House first, I can't remember. Anyway, he's been in politics basically all of my life, and I'm not that young. He knew a lot of Democratic segregationists back in the day. And he was giving a talk about how it used to be in our politics that there was a level of comedy and cooperation, and that even if you disagreed deeply and morally with someone, that you didn't have to hate them personally. And he name-checked a couple of segregationists, I guess Talmadge and Eastland, who are names that'll go down in the history books that aren't really so much talked about anymore right now. And there was a storm of controversy afterward of, these sort of callow 25-year-old social justice warrior Democrat types saying, well, how could you say nice things about these people? How could you have been friends with them and gone to dinner and treated them like, decent human beings? And Biden was like, well, I disagreed with them and I argued with them and I argued like heck with them. But, at the end of the day, you're not just going to hate people and refuse to work with them because you have different ideas about things including things that are morally important. So Joe Biden, oddly enough, had a point. There's two people that I have said that about that I don't normally say that about. One of the most important questions in politics that never gets asked is compared to what? So if you're Joe Biden, you're in the Senate in the 1970s, 1980s, you've got a couple of these old, cute Democratic segregationists in there. Well, you can either work with them and try to get stuff done while disagreeing with them and trying to change their mind about the things they're wrong about, or what? Do nothing, resign, refuse to speak to them, and where do we draw the line on that? Because there are people who care a lot about, say, abortion. Do we not talk to people who disagree with us on abortion? Can we not co-sponsor a tax bill with them, or something like that? And that's kind of where we're at right now. That there's this idea that if you don't vocally hate the people on the other side, then you're infected with whatever it is they're infected with, and that is what I call the politics of cooties.
It's another book, I think. I think Politics of Cooties is the next book.
Yeah, close to that, actually. There's actually a lot of politics of cooties in the book, yeah.
Well, and it is interesting because he is getting hit from his own side on this. John King on CNN called him stupid, called the comments stupid.
Yeah.
Kamala,
go ahead. Kamala did it as well. The way they're covering Joe Biden, because I'm kind of with you on this, I feel like he's not going to make it. He is too gaffe prone. And there's a lot of people who haven't had one debate yet. The idea that he's leading the polls shouldn't be that determinative. But I think the interesting part about it is the media is not giving him favorable coverage. They're not giving him the excuses. They're not saying, well, what he meant was. They are just destroying him over and over again. He's being treated like he's a Republican. Is basically the way it is. And it's like that doesn't. They did a lot of that to Hillary too. I mean, last time. Once she got the nomination, they were a little bit kinder. But
they don't want the old guard.
Yeah, they don't. They don't. They want something new.
They want somebody new and really extreme and radical, and they might get one.
What about his? Because I read his comments. What about? He said something to the effect of, I was speaking to him and he didn't call me boy. He called me son. Mm-hmm. Because I guess this guy frequently referred to African Americans as boy.
Yeah.
And it was like kind of he was making a joke, I think, that, he didn't call me boy. Yeah. He just called me son. Do you think people should take issue with that?
Well, there's a lot of stuff on the racial business that you should take issue with on Biden. His infamous thing of speaking to a black audience and affecting a kind of Southern accent and talking about Republicans and saying they want to put y'all back in chains and that sort of thing. That stuff is ridiculous, and he should be embarrassed by it. But what he shouldn't be embarrassed by is the idea that in politics you work with people who you disagree with on things, including people you disagree with on things that are very important. That shouldn't be a particularly controversial idea. It is right now because everyone under 30 in America right now is just mentally challenged in some way, and they have sort of normal kind of level of function if you give them an SAT test or something like that, but they've got problems making connections between sort of normal rational outcomes, and there is this really overwhelming sense that outrage is what makes you a legitimate and authentic person. And so outrage is kind of the addiction of the moment. And it's really shaped the way people are thinking about things. And Joe Biden is too old to really benefit from that. Kamala Harris is not. And Elizabeth Warren is not.
All right, back in a minute.
When Elizabeth Warren's the spring chicken.
All right, we've got about a minute here. Kevin, you said that you don't think that Biden will be the nominee. Who do you think it's going to be?
If I had to guess, I would say I think there's a good chance that Elizabeth Warren gets it. The one I would worry the most about if I were Donald Trump or someone who cared about seeing him reelected would be Kamala Harris.
Yes. So you think Kamala would?
I think she's smarter,
more in the debate.
Well, I think she's smarter than Warren. I think she's more ruthless. I think she's more of a politician, and she wants it more. I think I've seen Warren campaign. She's a terrible campaigner. She's pretty stiff. She's pretty cold, and she's not as smart as she thinks she is. Which
she
is
is Native American, though.
She is Native American.
I forgot that.
I do think we learn a lot about Harris over the next couple months. With these debates, this should be a strength for her, right? Like a prosecutor, that I think should be something that she should be able to do really well. She should be able to really shine there, and if she can't, you wonder if she's going to make her move. I've been pretty bullish on her from the beginning, and it hasn't quite caught fire yet. It'll be interesting to see if she can do it.
I think Seth Moulton's the guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
But based on
surprise people. Based on just the intuition.
Oh, okay.